Hi everyone. I'm so sorry about this late night upload. I've had quite a week, but nonetheless, uh, as we are all discussion leaders for the Ferrara documentary and the articles on Kamala Harris, I am going to just go ahead and just speak a little bit about what I've learned and read and what my takeaways are. So first, starting with the Ferrara documentary, my knowledge of Geraldine Ferrara was very surface level actually. I knew about some of her accomplishments, namely her position as the U.S. ambassador and delegate to the UNHCR, or the United Nations Human Rights Council, during the Clinton administration. And during her time as the American delegate on the commission, anti-Semitism was condemned as a human rights violation for the first time in history, and she also created waves for calling out China for their historical track record for disregarding and abusing human rights of their citizens. I found her progression from being a school teacher to prosecutor to the House of Representatives and her attempt for the beyond inspirational and very telling. She was a school teacher because that's simply what women during that time did. But she felt unfulfilled by it. And against all odds, she went to law school, graduated, and began to rise through the political ranks with support, especially by many women who for so long thought that such power held by females wasn't possible. She broke through so many stereotypes and became a very respected political figure. She was a person that many people felt really connected with, and she embodied power, grace, education, and so much meaning for a lot of American citizens. In regard to the Mondale Ferraro ticket, there was a lot of positive fuel behind their campaign, although it did end up falling flat in the long run against Reagan. But it was so successful because people really tied their beliefs and their hopes to the cause. I find it really interesting that supporters were so emotionally invested beyond their political and ideological interests and stances. I think when we learn about history and the presidential elections, we either don't maybe focus on the emotional aspect of elections, or it maybe simply wasn't as present in voters' minds. Either way, the Mondale Ferrara campaign was emotionally charged in a way that I see a lot of current voters today are. The focus on Ferrara's family life was really surprising to me. I'd never heard about it, and so much of history is sanitized, so we don't see as personal vendettas against political or public figures, I think. I wonder a lot if the trials on her husband and the glaring spotlight on the Ferrara family was legitimate in cause, or if it was purely a misogynistic take. I think it was so extreme in Ferrara's case because she was not only a public political figure, but because she was also a wife and a mother. Male politicians generally aren't so scrutinized on their family lives. I think they have a lot more leeway in that regard. But perhaps the thinking was that Ferrara was seemingly abandoning her familial duties for an occupation that was so staunchly male. Toward the end, there's a little bit of focus on the Obama 2008 campaign. Her comments about the former president underscores the generational gap in thinking. I did some external research just to follow up on the comments, and it turns out that Ferrara was absolutely livid about one of her daughters voting for Obama instead of Hillary Clinton, whom Ferrara was involved with. And I found that the younger female voters seemed to align more with Obama than Clinton, perhaps because they saw nothing special or nothing so specific or peculiar about electing a female president compared to the milestone of electing an African American one. In reading about it in this light and this lens, I could see how younger women disregarded, or how the younger women seemingly disregarded the blood, sweat, and tears that older generations of women had left behind to provide new opportunities for those who would come after. And it reminded me a lot about the Seneca Falls reading, where a lot of the older suffragettes felt and thought that the newer suffragettes were ungrateful and, very impolite about some of the things that the older suffragettes had to fight for. I still think that there's something to be said about Ferraro's comments and outrage that, for people who are voting for Obama instead of an older white woman. I think that Ferraro was so entrenched in her own path and her own time making way for others. But I think her intended audience wasn't one that was as diverse. I think she had a very, perhaps, narrow lens in terms of what type of people she was trying to encourage with her breaking these ceilings. I think that her intentions were women, but perhaps not women who were multiracial or had, several intersectional identities. In regards to the New York Times and Washington Post articles on Kamala Harris, I found them really eye-opening. I only knew really about Harris's experience as the DA of San Francisco and her work on the House of Representatives, but nothing more than that. I actually found myself in somewhat of a bind because I did some more research on Harris and sort of her background, her family life, and I am so disappointed in myself that I was so surprised that she came from such a successful background. Her father is currently an emeritus economics professor at Stanford and is really famous for some of his work in terms of Keynesian economics. Her mother was a biomedical researcher who made a lot of advancements in terms of breast cancer and a lot of in terms of using gene therapy. Her sister Maya is also an incredibly established, successful lawyer who worked on, I think she was one of the advisors on the Clinton campaign, and now she does a lot of work for the ACLU. Her brother-in-law is also a lawyer, and I think also a general counsel for Uber. And, I don't know why I found it so shocking. I think that so many of us in America are still stuck in that sort of stereotypical mindset where we assume that someone who's multiracial couldn't possibly have, such a successful family. And in that regard, I was so disappointed that I also fell into that hole, considering I am someone who embodies a lot of intersectional compounding identities. That was just something that really stood out to me. But back to the articles, the Biden-Harris win will break so many grounds, like having a female vice president for the first time, much less having a vice president who is Black Indian, having a male, vice gentleman. And I am incredibly interested to see how her several intersectional identities will carry her in her decision making in the next 4 years, especially as her former running mate, now president-elect, is an older white male. I think that's going to be a very interesting contrast to look out for in the next coming years. And another point that I found interesting in the articles is that in the Democratic primaries and debates, we saw friction between Biden and Harris, especially in regards to issues on race. I wonder how Harris's experiences and influence in general will play into the drafting and enactments of policy. And I think another thing to consider is the difference between Harris's campaign for the presidency and vice presidency. She suffered a lot of backlash and had what I would call a relatively lukewarm reception to her running for the Democratic nomination, but she spiked in popularity after it was announced that she would be Biden's running mate. And I think all of that begs the question, is our country still unaccepting of a woman in the presidential seat? And does a woman always have to trail after a man, especially in the upper echelons of American politics? I wonder also if she'll suffer the same type of fate and scrutiny on her personal life as Ferraro did. I think some of the questions that I'm asking myself are, will her intersectional identities fuel her opponents? And will they look to poke holes in her being as not only a vice president, but a woman and a wife, I think, and a mother, for that matter? I think those are all really important questions that we need to sort of look out for as they become to be answered. Yeah.